Imagine the sun sinking below the horizon and nothing coming to replace it. No streetlights, no glowing windows in the distance, no phone screen to check, just a darkness so complete that you cannot see your own hand in front of your face. For the earliest humans, this was not an occasional inconvenience. This was every single night, for their entire lives, for the entire history of the species before a certain point. And at some stage, buried somewhere in that darkness, a question must have quietly taken shape. Not asked out loud, not written down anywhere, but felt urgently in the body. How do we see when the sun is gone? This is the story of how humans answered that question, not in one flash of inspiration, but across an almost incomprehensibly long stretch of trial, accident, observation, and slow generational improvement. It starts in complete darkness, and it ends, eventually, with a species that lit up the night sky itself. To understand why this mattered so much, you first have to sit with what darkness actually meant before artificial light existed in any form. Night on the open savanna, or deep inside a forest, or at the mouth of a cave, was not simply dim. In the absence of even faint moonlight, on a heavily overcast or moonless night, human vision becomes almost useless within a matter of minutes. Depth perception collapses. Familiar landmarks disappear. And every early human population lived in landscapes that also contained large, genuinely dangerous predators, animals whose night vision was, in many cases, considerably better adapted to the dark than human eyesight ever was. This created a set of very real, practical problems. Moving safely became difficult since an unseen route, a loose rock, or a sudden drop in terrain could cause a serious injury with no way to get help until morning. Predators became a much greater threat since many large carnivores are more active and more effective hunters after dark. Body temperature became harder to manage in cooler climates, since the sharp temperature drop that often follows sunset offers no visual warning the way clouds gathering before rain might. And, perhaps most fundamentally, nighttime represented a complete stop to nearly every productive activity a group might otherwise be doing. Food preparation, tool-making, childcare, or simply moving from one place to another. Researchers studying human evolutionary history have proposed that these pressures, extending over an enormous span of time, would have created strong selective incentive for any behavior or technology that could push back against the darkness, even partially. This is a reasonable evolutionary framework rather than a directly observed historical event, since no one was recording behavior at the time, but the underlying logic that darkness posed genuine survival costs and that any means of mitigating those costs would have offered a real advantage is well supported by what we know about ancient environments and predator behavior. The first real answer to this problem was not a lamp, or a torch, or anything humans deliberately built. It was fire itself, and specifically the eventual ability to control it. Wildfires caused by lightning strikes and other natural events have existed for as long as there has been vegetation and oxygen on the planet's surface, meaning early hominins would have encountered naturally occurring fire long before they had any ability to create or control it themselves. The earliest confirmed archaeological evidence for controlled fire use by early humans comes from sites including Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, where researchers have identified burned bone fragments and ash deposits deep inside the cave, dated to roughly 1 million years ago. Because these traces were found far from the cave entrance, in a location wildfires could not have reached naturally. Researchers consider this reasonably strong evidence of deliberate, controlled fire use rather than an accidental natural burn. Additional evidence from a site called Gesher Beno Yaakov in what is now Israel suggests possible controlled fire use dating back roughly 790,000 years, based on clusters of burned material concentrated in specific locations rather than scattered randomly across the site, a pattern researchers argue is more consistent with a maintained hearth than with a wildfire passing through the area. It is worth being clear that the exact point at which fire shifted from something occasionally encountered and opportunistically used to something reliably controlled, deliberately maintained, and eventually created on demand remains a genuinely debated area of ongoing research. Different sites suggest different timelines, and researchers are careful not to claim a single, universally agreed upon date for when this transition was complete. What almost certainly came first, based on the reasoning of researchers studying early fire use, was not the ability to create fire from nothing, but rather the ability to capture and maintain it. A wildfire, or a fire caused by a lightning strike, could be approached once it had burned down to glowing embers, and those embers could potentially be transported, fed with additional fuel, and kept alive for an extended period. This would have required real, sustained effort. A fire needs fuel added at the right pace. It needs airflow. Left completely unattended for too long, it goes out, and if that happens far from another natural source, the group would have to wait for another fire to occur naturally, which could take a very long time. This single requirement, keeping a fire alive continuously, appears to have shaped an enormous amount of early human social behavior, according to researchers studying the archaeological and anthropological evidence connected to hearth sites. Maintaining a fire meant someone or some rotating group of people needed to actively watch over it, especially through the night, when a fire dying out unnoticed while everyone slept could leave a group both cold and defenseless until dawn. Archaeologists studying ancient hearth locations, sites where the physical remains of long-term repeated fire use are visible in the layered ash and burned soil, have found that hearths often appear to have functioned as a stable, central gathering point within a broader living space, suggesting that the physical geography of daily life increasingly organized itself around the fire once reliable fire maintenance became possible. Once fire could be reliably kept alive, its very first and most obvious use after dark was almost certainly simple illumination, light radiating outward from the flames themselves, without any additional tool or technology required. Researchers studying the behavioral effects of firelight have noted several genuine, practical advantages this would have offered immediately. A campfire extends the range of activity after sunset, allowing food preparation, tool-making, and other close, detailed manual tasks to continue well past the point where working entirely by moonlight or starlight would have been possible. It also appears to have served an important defensive function. Many large predators show a strong instinctive aversion to open flame, and researchers studying ethnographic accounts of more recent hunter-gatherer groups have documented fire being used deliberately as a defensive perimeter around a sleeping camp, a practice widely assumed to reflect a very ancient pattern given how consistently it appears across unrelated cultures on different continents. While this specific defensive use cannot be directly observed in the deep archaeological past, the logic connecting fire to reduced predator risk is strong enough that many researchers consider it a highly plausible extension of much earlier behavior. There is also a genuinely compelling, though more actively debated, hypothesis connecting firelight after dark to human social behavior itself. Some researchers studying the evolution of human social structures have proposed that extended firelit evenings, hours when a group was awake, fed, safe from immediate physical labor, and gathered closely around a shared light source, may have created uniquely valuable conditions for extended conversation, storytelling, and social bonding, activities that would have been considerably more difficult to sustain during the physically demanding, sunlit hours typically devoted to foraging, hunting, or tool-making. This idea remains a genuinely interesting and actively discussed hypothesis rather than settled fact, since it is extremely difficult to directly test or confirm using physical evidence alone. But it offers one compelling possible explanation for why humans developed such an unusually rich tradition of oral storytelling and complex nighttime social behavior compared to many other species. Simple firelight, however, has an obvious and significant limitation: it does not move easily. A campfire illuminates the area immediately around it, but it cannot travel with a person moving through a dark cave, walking to check on a food store some distance away, or exploring an unfamiliar space. Solving this problem required a genuinely new kind of technological thinking, one focused not just on maintaining fire, but on making it portable. The most straightforward solution was the torch, a burning piece of material that could be carried by hand. While a torch may sound almost too simple to require any real technological development, researchers studying experimental archaeology, meaning researchers who physically recreate ancient technologies using period-appropriate methods and materials to test how they actually perform, have found that effective torches require real, non-obvious engineering. A torch made purely from dry wood burns quickly, unevenly, and often unpredictably, sometimes going out entirely at an inconvenient moment. Adding certain materials, including resin from particular tree species, appears to have significantly improved both the brightness and the burn duration of early torches, based on both experimental reconstructions and, in some cases, the analysis of charring patterns and residue found on ancient wooden fragments. This detail matters more than it might initially seem, because it demonstrates something important about how this whole technological progression likely unfolded. Getting a torch to burn well, brightly, steadily, and for a useful length of time required real trial and error, testing different types of wood, different amounts and placements of resin, different thicknesses and lengths, refined gradually over an unknown number of attempts and, quite possibly, an unknown number of frustrating failures that left no clear trace for archaeologists to recover today. Torches solved the problem of portability, but they still burned relatively quickly, and required someone to actively hold and monitor them at all times. The next significant development addressed a different challenge entirely: how to produce a steadier, longer-lasting, more controlled source of light, one that did not need to be constantly held, fed, or replaced every few minutes. This is where the earliest known lamps enter the story. And here, the archaeological evidence becomes considerably more concrete and well-documented. Some of the clearest, earliest confirmed evidence for deliberately constructed oil lamps comes from painted cave sites in what is now France and Spain, including the famous cave complex at Lascaux, dated to roughly 17,000 years ago. Archaeologists working at these sites have recovered small, simple stone lamps, typically shallow hollows worked into a piece of stone, sometimes limestone or sandstone, designed to hold a quantity of animal fat along with a simple wick made from plant material such as moss or juniper bark. When lit, this kind of lamp burns considerably more slowly and steadily than an open torch, producing a smaller, more contained, longer-lasting flame. The connection between these lamps and the deep painted cave art found at sites like Lascaux is genuinely significant, because the specific chambers containing some of the most elaborate prehistoric paintings are located deep inside the cave system, in total darkness, far beyond any point where natural daylight could ever reach. Archaeologists studying these sites have found soot deposits and small burn marks on cave walls and ceilings in locations consistent with lamps having been used specifically to illuminate the painting process itself. Direct physical evidence that these early lamps were not simply used near a cave entrance, but were carried deliberately into the deepest, darkest sections of an underground space specifically to allow sustained, detailed work in complete darkness. This represents a genuinely significant technological leap beyond a simple torch, because a stone lamp filled with rendered animal fat could burn for an extended period with minimal attention, freeing a person's hands and attention for detailed, sustained work such as painting, carving, or other precise manual tasks that would have been extremely difficult to perform while also holding a burning torch. It is worth pausing here to be clear about what researchers can and cannot say with confidence regarding exactly how this specific lamp technology developed. The confirmed evidence includes the surviving stone lamps themselves, chemical residue analysis in some cases confirming the presence of animal fat, and the physical soot evidence connecting lamps to specific painted locations deep within caves. What remains genuinely uncertain is the precise sequence of smaller experimental steps, which materials were tried and discarded before settling on effective combinations. Which individuals or groups first refined the technique that led to this particular, relatively sophisticated design. Researchers generally treat the finished stone lamp as the visible result of a longer, largely undocumented period of experimentation, rather than assuming it appeared as a single sudden invention. Different materials appear to have been used for lamp fuel depending on what was locally available to a given population, and the archaeological and ethnographic record shows considerable regional variation as a result. In some coastal or aquatic environments, various forms of fish or marine mammal oil served as effective lamp fuel. Based on ethnographic accounts of more recent populations living in similar environments and occasional supporting archaeological residue. In other regions, rendered fat from land animals, commonly referred to as tallow, appears to have been the primary fuel source. Some populations appear to have used naturally occurring mineral oils or specific plant oils where locally available. Though the timeline and geographic spread of these different fuel choices varies considerably and remains an active area of ongoing archaeological research rather than a single settled universal sequence. Containers for these fuels also varied considerably depending on local materials and resources. Hollowed stones represent some of the earliest and most durable surviving examples, precisely because stone survives extremely well in the archaeological record compared to more perishable organic materials. However, researchers studying ethnographic parallels among more recent traditional societies have documented shells, hollowed gourds, and simple pottery vessels all being used as lamp containers in various cultures, and it is entirely plausible, though not always directly provable through surviving physical evidence, that materials like large shells may have served a similar illumination purpose in various regions considerably earlier than the stone lamps that happen to survive most clearly in the archaeological record today. This represents a genuine and honest limitation in the evidence, since organic and shell-based containers are simply far less likely to survive for tens of thousands of years compared to carved stone, meaning our confirmed physical evidence is almost certainly biased toward the more durable materials, even if less durable materials may well have been used earlier or more widely than currently documented. As pottery-making technology developed independently in different regions of the world, generally understood to have emerged sometime after roughly 20,000 years ago, depending on the specific region under discussion, oil lamps eventually shifted from hollowed stone toward deliberately shaped, fired ceramic vessels, offering considerably more control over the size, shape, and burning characteristics of a lamp compared to whatever natural stone shapes happen to be available in a given location. This progression, from a natural hollow and found stone to a deliberately carved stone lamp to a purpose-built ceramic lamp specifically designed and fired for the task, illustrates a broader pattern that appears repeatedly throughout the story of early lighting technology. Each new material or technique offered a bit more control, consistency, or convenience than what came before it, refined gradually across an enormous span of time, generation after generation, through countless small improvements rather than any single dramatic invention. What makes this entire progression, from captured embers to maintained hearths to portable torches to controlled oil lamps, genuinely remarkable is not any individual technological leap in isolation. It is the sheer cumulative weight of the whole process, an extraordinarily long chain of observation, experimentation, and gradual refinement, stretching across hundreds of thousands of years and, eventually, across nearly every region of the inhabited world. No single person invented artificial light. No single moment marks the precise beginning of humanity's relationship with the darkness. Instead, countless individuals across an almost unimaginable span of time noticed something useful, tried to improve upon it in some small way, and passed that small improvement on to the people who came after them, who then improved upon it further in turn. Every one of these developments, capturing embers, maintaining a hearth, finding the right combination of wood and resin for a reliable torch, discovering that rendered fat burns slowly and steadily inside a hollowed stone, represented a real, hard-won answer to that same simple, urgent question that must have first taken shape somewhere in the deep, disorienting darkness of an early human night. How do we see when the sun is gone. The next time you flip a switch and a room fills instantly with light, it is worth remembering that this action represents the endpoint of an unimaginably long chain of trial, error, and accumulated human ingenuity, stretching back to a time when a single glowing ember, carefully protected and carried by hand, may have represented one of the single most valuable and hard-won possessions a group of early humans could have owned. The darkness never actually went away. Humans simply learned, slowly, patiently, and across an enormous span of time, exactly how to carry a small piece of the sun along with them, long after it had disappeared beneath the horizon.